Hello, I'm Mike the Crafty Physicist. I was looking to get some more futuristic themed miniature painting done, say 40k, that sort of thing. And what I wanted to do right away was have my miniatures on bases designed with craters on them. Now, I have a 3D printer, but the only bases that I could find were in a very small number with not a lot of variety. I wanted to try and find a way to generate an enormous number of unique crater-shaped bases and be able to print them out. Now, I knew NASA had released an enormous amount of free printable files, including some detailed ones featuring the lunar surface. So my plan was this: make a base-shaped plunger on Blender and attach it to the NASA STL file. Now, once I've done that, cut that together, leaving only the parts that are inside both pieces. That way I should end up with a base with craters on the top. Save that, print it out, paint it. Good job. I imported the file for the far side of the moon from NASA because it has a lot more cratering than the near side. And then I built myself a plunger. I created a cone. It has a top diameter set as 23, bottom 25, and I set the height to 3.25. Now this is all I'm thinking proportions, so I can edit this later in Cura when I try to print it. Now, however I scale it, it should now have dimensions proportional to a standard 25mm base. I then add a tall cylinder and put it on top of the cone, and I use a Boolean operation to combine the two shapes. Essentially the reason for this is that the cylinder keeps crater detail above the height of the base. If I didn't have that on top and put my base in and combined them, I would end up with some craters and then a flat surface where it just cuts off because it doesn't keep the top ridges of the craters. I move the base to an area in the XY plane that I think will look good, and I eyeball the height the base should be at. Blender lets you switch camera angles, and I'm not very experienced in it, so there's a lot of jumping about trying to find where I want to be. Now, I use an effect called a Boolean Intersection. This is the thing that takes only the parts that are within both objects. I do this between the plunger I've made and the moon file, and then I pull it out. This leaves a 25mm base with craters on the top of it. I save a file with one moon surface and one plunger to use as a template, and then I can go on and try different sizes of base, different positions. Remember, I can rescale the absolute size when I know to print them. At the end of each make, I delete the moon and leave just the resultant crater. I then export the object as an STL file, which is very easy on Blender. It's just a basic export option, and it's now ready for printing. I import the bases into Cura. I check the position on the print bed and the size of the models. I print some 25mm bases, but I also made one to be 50mm wide just to see how it looks. I send them to an SD card and I print them out. I only use a simple paint job for these tests. They're just the first run that I'm doing, so I don't want to put too much time into something like that. A dark grey base, and then a light grey dry brush, leaving the sides black. And this is the final result. One large base, as well as a handful of smaller bases, 25 ones. So, what do I think? Well, for starters, they're a bit thin. I think the reason for this was because I used 3.25mm as the height, but unlike a normal miniature base where you add things on top of that, I'm subtracting a bit because of the craters. So I'm going to have to fix that. I'm going to have to raise the height a bit, experiment with what actually works best. I also had a couple of troubles with the edges of the bases. This one probably shows it better. The edge is raised oddly, rather than producing a nice slope. I think that's a problem with my printer rather than with how I set it up, and that perhaps the edge raised off the base a bit when it was printing, and it didn't sit perfectly. That carried on with the next layer and I got problems. So I'm going to go back to experimenting, but for a first try I think that worked rather well. Hope you found this useful. I've been Mike, the Crafty Physicist. Goodbye.